G'day and welcome to this episode of Ranger Touring. This is going to be the second part to my favourite tracks videos. The reason I'm going to keep updating these is so that as I do trips throughout the year, I can update you on the best tracks to do and give you some ideas for fall driving adventures. If you haven't already, check out my last video where I talked through my top 5. For this, I'm going to take you through another couple of tracks as well. So in no particular order, starting out is the Crooked River track. The Crooked River track is in the Victorian high country. It's a track that runs from Dargo and then heads out through Talbotville and then does a bit of a loop around. You go through the Crooked River about 24 times. It's an awesome track in terms of water crossings because they're so frequent. Generally speaking, it's a pretty well maintained track. There are a few tricky entrances and a few spots where you have to pick a line to avoid some large rocks or holes on the entrances and exits. Apart from that though, it's a lot of fun. I guess the key mods that you'd want, depending on the time of year, is definitely a snorkel. Most of the crossings didn't come up above the bull bar, definitely not over the hood, but I've seen some videos of people taking it on when there's been a lot more rainfall and they're a lot higher. So how do you get there? You take the Crooked River Road out of Dargo. Dargo forms a bit of a central point in the high country where you can go and take on a lot of the tracks in the area. It's probably the most well-known spot in the high country for taking on those infamous challenges like the Crooked River track and Billy Goat's Bluff. For the Crooked River track, I ran 25 PSI on my tyres. It's a track for people of all skill levels, so I'd highly recommend it. The next track is the Loop track. That's in KROOMBIT Tops National Park. The Loop track, as it suggests, is a loop, and it's a one-way track, so you can only go in a clockwise direction. The first half of the loop is pretty basic. It's mostly two-wheel drive road with a few scrabbly sections. But as you descend down to the Wall Campground, which is also the start of the walking track for the B2 Bomber crash site walk, it starts to get a bit more difficult. You have a bit of a rocky descent down the hill, and then going out of the campsite, you have a nice steep climb, which has a lot of rocky sections, which are quite fun to drive. I found it actually a really fun track because the difficulty was fun where you're enjoying it, but you're not worried about crashing your car or doing any serious damage. There's a few sections where you need to put it in low range and you might lift a wheel, but generally speaking, it's a track for quite a stock standard car. It does say that out of the campsite it's meant to be a Ford, but I think you'd have to have a serious amount of rain for there to be actual water flowing through the campsite. There wasn't when we went there. So the key mods you need, probably not really anything. I'd say a stock standard car could make it through. It probably wouldn't hurt to have a better set of tyres just due to the rocky terrain. So how do you get there? KROOMBIT Tops, the national park itself, is about an hour to an hour and a half south of Rockhampton. So from there you head down Tablelands Road and you follow that until you enter the national park. You head straight and you can't miss it. There's not really any turn-offs apart from the turn-off to Razorback, but you'd actually have to veer off the main track to get there. So you just keep following it and eventually you'll hit the split where the loop starts and you've got to go around to the left from there. For the loop track, I was running 25 PSI on the tyres and I think that was fine. It's a really enjoyable track for all levels and the walk out of the campsite is excellent as well. Highly recommend it. So the next track isn't necessarily a specific track, but it's Little Desert National Park as a whole. Little Desert National Park is obviously the smaller brother of Big Desert National Park, which is slightly to the north. Little Desert National Park is a collection of sandy tracks that go through a pretty flat area of terrain. There's not really any big hills in Little Desert, which I will admit was a little disappointing, but it didn't take away from the overall experience. It's a spot where most of the tracks are just sandy, rutted, with some sections of, I guess, rocky areas and some rutted sections of mud and dirt. Generally speaking though, I'd say it's a pretty easy area. In terms of difficulty, I'd say it's a relatively easy four-wheel drive experience. You could definitely go out there with a stock car. The only thing that makes, I guess, it difficult is the fact that you're so remote. You're right on the South Australia-Victoria border and reasonably far north within Victoria as well. So you are kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's very limited reception whilst you're out there, and if something were to go wrong, you'd be in a bit of trouble. As well as that too, due to the fact that there's a lot of low-lying terrain, there's actually not anything to winch yourself out of if you, for instance, got stuck in some of the mud holes that are out there. So just again, if you're going to go out there, I'd probably suggest going in a group or with a whole bunch of recovery gear. Key mods, I don't think you need anything. Probably just maybe a sat phone or, again, like I said, go out with someone else. So how do you get there? You'll go through the town of Horsham and it's about 20 minutes from there. There's a few entrances and exits into Little Desert because it does cover quite a large distance, but it's up to you where you want to head out through. Overall, I'd say it's an awesome place. Definitely an area for beginners in terms of forward driving and getting to know your car. You can't really go too far wrong in terms of getting stuck. Just take some safe lines and you'll have a great time out. For Little Desert, overall, I ran about 20 to 18 PSI in the tyres. So the next track is Launder's track in the Grampians. The Grampians is located in Victoria, sort of on the western side of Victoria. So in the Grampians, from what I experienced, most of the tracks around were just dirt roads. However, Launder's track was a pretty serious four-wheel drive track. It was incredibly rocky. You had to pick a very specific line if you wanted to make it up without hitting anything, and there was quite a few tight sections. And then finally there was a really big rock step, which I tried going around to the left and had no luck. I ended up on the side steps, which took a bit of a hit for me. The other way to go up was on the right hand side, which I got the front up, but then unfortunately didn't get all the way up and had to winch. And from there I had to continue winching a little bit just because I couldn't get traction. After that part, it doesn't really let up much, and there's still lots of sections where you've got car on some pretty decent angles. As well as that too, there's heaps of spots where you need a decent amount of ground clearance to step up. So if I'm going to go through, I guess, the modifications that you need to have for your vehicle to complete Launder's track, I'd say these. Definitely a winch, just in case. A good amount of lift, some good tyres, probably some lockers. The car that I have, the Ford Ranger, has a rear locker, and I definitely wouldn't have said no to a front locker in a few spots. So how do you get to Launder's track? Hawes Gap is the main way to get into the Grampians National Park in its entirety. However, there is a few different ways to come in from different angles. Launder's track itself runs off Glenang River Road, and the turn off for that is pretty close to Reed's Lookout. For Launder's track, I was running about 22 to 20 PSI in the tyres, and I'd suggest potentially even going lower than that. It's definitely a really good track to do. I'd highly recommend it. It is a seasonal track, so it does close during the winter months. So there's about a 4 to 5 month period where you actually won't be able to drive it. But if you can, and you've got the vehicle to do it, I would highly recommend doing it. The last track for this video is Five Rocks. Five Rocks track is out at Byfield National Park, which is about an hour sort of northeast of Rockhampton. The Five Rocks track itself goes from Stockyard Point and goes all the way out to the beach where you can walk out and physically walk on the Five Rocks. So how difficult is the track itself? It's actually reasonably difficult for a sand track. There was a few sections where people got into trouble. So even just getting there in the first place was quite difficult. You got to go up through Big Sandy, which is I'd say about a 400 to 500 meter uphill sand hill, which we found reasonably easy at the time. But I think if it was a lot hotter and the sand was a bit more powdery, you might have even struggled to get up that part. And I've seen plenty of people get bogged on YouTube. Once you pass Big Sandy, it's reasonably smooth going until you get onto the Five Rocks track. From there's a number of sections where it's quite rutted out, and there's a lot of wombat holes requiring a good degree of flex, and probably a locker or two wouldn't hurt. Probably the most difficult part was actually the beach entrance, or once you drive onto the beach, coming back up that hill. There's a big U-turn sort of corner where you've really got to give it a lot of right foot to get up. Once you're up, it's reasonably smooth sailing. The only other problem is we went on an Easter long weekend and there was a lot of traffic. Heaps of people going up and down those tracks make it quite hard to navigate, and there's not a lot of space to pull over. So it is slow going, and you do have to, I guess, for the sake of other people on the track, know what you're doing so you don't get bogged all the time and hold everyone up. So how do you get there? You go out through Byfield National Park and head out to Stockyard Point. There's a campsite there where you can camp, and then you can head on to the Five Rocks track. It's not really well signposted, so I'd suggest taking a map or a GPS or something like that just to help you get on the right tracks. For the Five Rocks track, I was running 16 PSI in the tyres, and I think that was about appropriate. So that's it for an updated 2022 favourite tracks. I'd highly recommend all these tracks. If you've got any questions about any of these tracks, please leave something in the comments and I'll make sure to get back to you. I'd highly recommend going out to any of these places. They offer varying degrees of difficulty, and you'll get to put your car through a different set of terrain, which is awesome and really fun to do. This won't be the last of my favourite tracks videos. I'm going to keep updating these as I tackle more tracks and develop more and more favourite experiences. But for this episode, that's it. Thanks for tuning in.